Pledge and a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and the republic for which it stands, nation under God, indivisible.
Gary, so roll call.
Mr. Umbriak.
Here.
Mr. Reichert Jr.
Here.
Mr. Reichert Sr.
Here.
Mr. Huffman.
Here.
Dr. Faulkner.
Here.
Mr. Garman.
Here.
Mr. Burkhart. Mr. Vognitz. Dr. Green.
Here. 2-1, public comment, agenda items only. Okay. 3-1, K through 5 math, iReady classrooms.
Thank you. Mr. Ryan, you could move ahead a couple of slides to our first section of Committee of the Whole this evening is focused on our academic affairs and mental health curriculum. And Mr. Moser is going to speak to several of these slides.
Yeah, so during the course of the late winter, early spring, we asked our math teachers in K through 8 to review some curricular resources to help determine where we were going, in terms of a contract for those resources, textbooks next year. We currently have iReady classroom materials. That is what that previous board adopted. After a careful evaluation, K through 5 was unanimous in deciding that they wanted to basically essentially re-up with iReady Classroom. We will be recommending that we renew our contract with iReady Classroom Mathematics through Curriculum Associates. You'll see that as a voting item next week. One way or another, this is not a new cost. This is basically replacing a cost that you re-up every few years. That's the way it goes. I will say that I want to thank those teachers who did that during a professional development day. The textbook adoption process is outlined in Board Policy 108 that was used. We will have that documentation attached for you to be able to review before making a vote. I'm getting a couple more signatures of teachers who were through that process, just so that everybody is aware. But one thing I will say in terms of in terms of iReady Classroom is if you go into research, it literally is the one math curricular resource that gets a 5-star rating across the board for all things. It's actually the only one in the most recent edition of Ed Reports that reached a perfect score. With that, one thing that we are aware of, and through conversations, it was implemented in a district several years ago, and at that time there would have been a pretty robust professional development through Curriculum Associates in terms of helping teachers to really utilize all the resources in order to do a great job of teaching that and using it for instruction. And since then, we've had obviously several new teachers come in, several teachers out, several new teachers in. So one of the things we will be doing with this contract is also incorporating a couple of professional development days to make sure that we get all of our teachers off on the right track and from the beginning of the year. So I don't know if anybody has any questions about those math curricular resources. Obviously something that we need something, and what we've determined is that it's both cost effective and, quite frankly, probably the best that's out there right now, according to all of our evaluations.
And in looking at curricular resources, Mr. Moser mentioned Ed Reports, But if that's not something you're familiar with, you could literally just like Google Ed Reports, and they look at curricular resources in different subject areas and different age bands, and then will rate them on how well they're meeting the standards in that subject area. So it would certainly be a factor we'd take into consideration. We do bring in curricular resources, let teachers look through them, let teachers fill out rubrics around it, but that would be an important data point. So if you've never been to Ed Reports, it's a fairly user-friendly site and might be worth exploring to just know what we're speaking about there.
So if we go to the next slide, please, Mr. Ryan, you'll see something else that we would like to do, and we'll be putting a budget transfer request on as a voting item next week. And I'll explain what that means is, as part of the curriculum budget this current fiscal year, what we would like to do is reallocate some funds that are in certain categories, so like textbooks, software, et cetera. We'd like to move enough money that is remaining and has not been spent in order to go into a 3-year contract with NWEA for both MAP, for MAP Fluency, and for MAP Growth. So what MAP Growth and MAP Fluency are norm referenced assessment platforms, which allow us to very quickly assess where our students are in terms of MAP Fluency in particular is, really foundational literacy skills. MAP Growth is math skills and comprehension skills in reading. Both fantastic software platforms, really kind of gold standard in the industry. And that will allow us to, on a K through 8 continuum, actually monitor our students' growth longitudinally over the course of several years, so that we're not resetting or transferring to a new system after each grade band. It will be cohesive through K through 8 in both reading and math. There's a lot of power in that. It helps us for core instruction, what your classroom teachers, they get the data, they have the data at their fingertips, they see where their students score. Breaking into small groups, it's helpful because you can see which students in the class have what in common in terms of their needs or their strengths. And what we did is this current year, we piloted MAP Growth at Liberty Valley in grades 3, 4, and 5. And so the data that we were able to kind of extrapolate from that, but then also that teachers were able to kind of get their hands on and dig through and analyze in terms of working through small group station, again, those interventional needs, is really powerful. And one thing I would like to point out is that we actually have enough money remaining in the curriculum budget from this current year to actually pay forward for the next 3 years. So we managed the budget in a manner that left us with the amount necessary in order to do that. So what we are asking for this slide and for the next slide, MAP Growth and Fluency, is for the board to approve a budget transfer, so no additional cost from what was originally budgeted this fiscal year, simply reallocating some of those funds at the end to get something that could be incredibly powerful for our students and teachers over the next 3 years. I don't know if I explained that as clearly as I possibly could, but happy to answer any questions about it.
The decision to do the in-depth, I mean, I know about this much about the progress monitoring, and one of the things that I've heard a lot about, and I think we did ourselves, was like Dibbles, for example. Mm-hmm. Does this replace Dibbles?
Great question. So Dibbles is an early reading indicator. Yeah. So essentially right now our reading specialists at the primary school proctor a Dibbles assessment for every student in grades K1 and 2. And there is a great deal of value in those assessments, but really for 40 to 50% of those students, they're going to do great on the Dibbles. So what it does is it literally takes days to do that because you can only test one-on-one.
Right.
And we only have a certain number of reading specialists. So right now we're using Dibbles as our universal screener in K2. What we would be doing with this is actually MAP Fluency would serve as our universal screener, and then kids who didn't do so, had a lower percentile on the fluency we would actually then individualize and still proctor the dibbles for them.
Right. So like at a then you can sort of get into the nuances of what was it phonemic awareness versus, okay, that makes sense.
And NWAA results will actually give you the results in those nuanced areas within literacy. So literacy has like a big 5, so you're going to get results in there. And even within phonemic awareness, when we look at the next one, you will get results that are specifically like they need to be working on beginning sounds versus medial sounds versus end sounds, and they'll even give you research-based interventions you can use.
Yeah.
So it's like click here for beginning sound activities you could use with a child in need.
Feels
And it will
more
give,
comprehensive than-
yes, it's
yeah.
very comprehensive.
Okay.
It's also, as a national test, this is in terms of measuring growth against like other kindergartners, other third graders. You have a bigger data pool here for us to understand how our students are growing.
Yeah, and if we can go to the next slide, I talked about MAP fluency, which is those early literacy foundational skills, but one thing we did do, we didn't want to go into it blindly, right? So we actually piloted this individually. My first grade daughter, we got some demo licenses and we had her take it, one person, to see how it went, one student, because students wear headphones and they have a microphone attached, and that's how they take the test. And then that went well, and then what we did is we broadened it out with the help of the primary school with the reading specialists, Mrs. Geis. We were able to then do small groups of first 3 and then another small group of 4, different grade levels, various student abilities. And what we found is the actual proctoring of the assessment went incredibly smoothly. So theoretically, you could probably have 10 students, easily have 10 students in this room and 10 students in the library taking this assessment at the same time. And it took about somewhere between 20 to 35 minutes, depending upon the student's ability. So if you think about the amount of time that we can save in proctoring that universal screener to get a good sense of where our students are at, it frees up those reading specialists who spend weeks throughout the school year actually testing. It frees them up to actually just get right to providing services.
Yeah.
So.
Which would be a better return on your investment.
Yeah, and then we
Absolutely.
were able to meet with a representative from NWEA to look at the students' results and the reading specialists that work with those students to say, yes, that really is an accurate description of that
Right.
child.
For like validating it with
So it was
what
just
they're
like
actually
even
seeing.
what their like anecdotal experience and what Dibbles is telling us about those students.
So again, not a new cost that we're asking for, just simply a budget transfer, and we wanted to be very transparent about why we were requesting that transfer and for what purposes. You go to the next slide, please, Mr. Ryan. Just very briefly, an update on the AP Capstone program. The first of 2 required courses, AP Seminar, will run in 24-25 school year. We've had over 50 students request this, so something new. I would say that is highly encouraging that we've had that many students who are highly interested in taking this. Obviously, a lot of times over the summer, those numbers do go down a little bit, but we still feel as if, as a starting point, having over 50, that is a very healthy number. We already have a teacher who is registered for the mandated summer training. She will be attending that in July, and through that training builds most of the actual course curriculum. During that time, it's almost like a workshop session. So that will be up and running next year. I do want to thank Dr. Gump. We had the opportunity as a team of administrators and teachers who would be involved in this program. We went on a site visit to Wilson High School in West Lawn, PA, outside of Reading. We had the opportunity. They were very gracious hosts, so I want to thank them. We had the opportunity to speak with the people who teach those AP seminar and research courses there, but also they opened their doors and allowed us to observe 2 classes, one of each of those. So it was a great experience to see it in action, because it can be very theoretical until you actually see it being done. You get a better sense of what does this look like, what does it mean, and Dr. Gump did a fantastic job of putting that visit together, and I just want to publicly thank him for that. And I think the team that went had a lot of great conversations that day, but then we also followed up another week later and kind of followed up in terms of what do we need to anticipate looking ahead? What are some of the challenges we foresee, but also, you know, what kind of opportunities do we foresee for our students? So very exciting, and looking forward to that continued work. We go to the next slide. Honestly, this is my most exciting slide of the evening. You may or may not remember, as board members, we presented a couple of months ago and said that we were able to, last summer, secure a $75,000 grant for dual enrollment purposes through PDE. So I want to publicly thank PDE for making that available. We were only 10% of the districts in Pennsylvania were actually awarded this grant. It was competitive. It was not just you fill out the form and you get it. We got the full allotment of $75,000 available to us. We will be spending $73,900 of that on dual enrollment credits. So what that means, I know we have the statistics here, is we were able to cover the cost of early college concurrent enrollment courses that are taught right here at Danville High School through Lackawanna College. We were able to, with that grant, pay for every student who enrolled. If they decided to enroll in the dual credit, we were able to cover it. So in totality, we had 93 different high school students who were able to benefit from this grant opportunity, and that accounted for 230 courses, which comes out to, in total, 733 credits, because some of those courses were 3-credit courses, some were 4. But the really exciting news, I think, for the community to see, the potential for savings that Danville students and families could see. So if they were to go, all these credits are transferable to Commonwealth University through articulation agreements between Lackawanna and those schools. If they were to go to any of those schools, the total value for the community is between $236,000 and $370,000. $236,000 if you look at it just as a per credit cost. But if you look at a semester's tuition, so a semester's tuition, when you pay a semester's tuition, you're paying the same whether you take 12 credits or 18. So by semester, the value to our community was $370,000 if transferred there. Now, those are not the only schools that will accept those credits. A lot of other universities and colleges will accept transfer credits from Lackawanna. We just know for sure that the state system, and about 40% of our students go to Apache school. So an incredible value, a great opportunity for our students. And again, I want to thank, again, Dr. Gump, high school guidance, for really working through this process and making sure that our students took advantage of those as much as possible, but also our teachers who willingly teach those concurrent
courses, yes.
enrollment courses. One of probably the highlight of my year was being able to go into Rebecca Blansfield's sociology class in the first semester and tell them about this opportunity, because unfortunately one thing we don't get to do is spend a lot of time with students. And so when we have those opportunities, especially for something that's positive, it was just, you know, really great to go in there and be able to have those conversations. We move on. The last item under academic affairs that we have is around the middle school schedule for the 24-25 school year. So the structure of the middle school schedule has been finalized. We want to give a lot of credit. Mr. Snover, Mrs. Earp, and Mr. Haravi developed this schedule after meeting with middle school faculty, hearing concerns, thinking about how they could address the things they heard. Please understand that doesn't always mean it's exactly what was suggested, but really taking into account the things that we heard, the things that we looked at from all perspectives, all data points. The schedule will include approximately 60-minute blocks of instruction, so students will have approximately 60-minute blocks throughout the school day. And the importance here is, if you know, we say we don't have enough time for deep learning, 60 minutes certainly extends that a great deal at the middle school level. When you're talking about literacy and math and science, there's an extension of the amount of time that all students will have, which will benefit students who need academic interventions and supports, but it will also benefit students who need enrichment, who are on or above grade level already. They will be able to be pushed further if given that amount of time and resources.
We specifically last month talked about the MTSS process and how students would be identified that need specific interventions. In a 60-minute block, there can be a period of time in which those interventions can be administered where students can be working in small groups. So it can be right in their core academic blocks with this model.
And one thing we are well aware of administratively is that there is a big difference between teaching for 42 or 43 minutes and moving to 60 minutes, and to make that time effective. So one of our focuses for professional development going into next year, specifically at the middle school, will be how to utilize extended periods of time in order to provide that deeper level of instruction.
Thank you. That is Mr. Moser and I's last academic affairs item, but Mr. Umbriak had asked for some time in this section of the meeting, so he's up next.
Yes, thank you. I'm sure there are people here that have things that they really feel strongly about, the things that they really love and have compassion for, and I would say that I really love this country. But I'm also concerned about the health of our citizens and of our young people and, of course, our students. After working in the healthcare field, first as an Army medic, then as an RN, and then as a certified registered nurse anesthetist for 40 years at Geisinger. 35 of those years were on the night shift from 11 to 7. I have seen over these years, and most here I'm sure are aware, that most the health issues that require medical intervention are self-inflicted. These are largely the result of poor life choices, such as our diet, our activity levels, our lack of exercise, sleep habits, stress levels, exposure to environmental toxins, smoking, alcohol, drugs, risky behavior, et cetera, et cetera. So I've been passionate about this for a long time. And prior to COVID, I initiated meetings after talking with Dr. Rue, who was GMC's CEO at the time, about the possibility of Geisinger getting involved in collaborating with Danville Area School District in establishing a comprehensive K-12 health curriculum. Initial meetings included representatives of Geisinger, the Danville Health Alliance, Dr. Rue's wife, Sarah, Danville Area School District curriculum directors, and myself and others. Unfortunately, COVID put an end to that after we had several meetings and things were really starting to roll and people were interested. COVID put a stop to it. I, along with Geisinger, had another meeting, and that was at the high school here. That was April 8th in 22. It was attended by approximately 17 people, including high school staff, the new curriculum director, coaches, GMC physicians and officials, Danville Health and Business Alliance, Mrs. Rue, and myself. There seemed to be good interest. However, shortly after that, the new curriculum director took another job, and again, interest faded. Despite spending more money per capita on health care than any similarly large and wealthy nation, the United States has a lower life expectancy than peer nations and has seen worsening health outcomes. According to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, the annual cost of health care was $3.2 trillion in 2017. It is projected to reach $5.7 trillion by 2026. I just want to pass these out. Pass these down. It is also projected that by 2030, close to half of the U.S. population will be obese, and 1/4 will be severely obese. This is associated with chronic disease and lower life expectancy and increased medical spending. According to the CDC, chronic diseases account for 75% of our nation's aggregate health care spending, and at least 45% 5% of Americans have at least one chronic disease. The World Health Organization estimates that 80% of all heart disease, stroke, and type 2 diabetes would be prevented if Americans would stop using tobacco, eat healthy, and exercise. Sounds pretty simple. I could give you a lot more statistics, but I think you get the idea. Even though we have the best health care system in the world, and all that money being spent on treating illnesses, only 3% of the health care dollar goes towards prevention. 3%, 3 pennies out of a dollar. And that is the focus of why I'm presenting here. It's prevention through knowledge. The best setting to impart such knowledge is in the K through 12 school system. Students need to learn early on to build good health habits before bad ones become ingrained. Health education is a subject equally as important, arguably more important than other core subjects. Most people know little about their bodies. Would an in-depth knowledge of the structure and function of one's own body and what it takes to keep it healthy have a positive effect on their health decisions? Our schools, along with the medical community, have the ability to implement such a program. It needs to start in the lowest grades with basics, then grade appropriate incrementally, building on previous knowledge. It would give students the power of knowledge of how their bodies, with all the various systems, work. They should know how what they eat and drink affects their health and the importance of exercise. They need to hear these things repeatedly throughout their education so that it becomes the basis of what they think, of how they think about their health and how their choices affect it. Repetition is important. You can tell someone one time or 10 times that they shouldn't do this or do that. But they not only need to hear it, but they need to see the effects. Perhaps they would not take their bodies and health for granted, and that they as individuals have considerable control over their well-being. Let them be exposed through guest lecturers on what happens when bad decisions are made to help reinforce what they are learning. Such an education could help avoid or delay the onset of chronic disease, which could drastically lower health care costs and increase their healthy, productive years. I'm not criticizing what is now taught in school about health, both physical and mental. I just believe it is inadequate. Just look at the general health of our population, including school-aged children, to answer that question. You know, we went through a COVID pandemic, and many people died. But no, most of those people that died were elderly. Most of those people had secondary issues, health issues. People don't realize the importance of our immune system. People with good immune systems didn't have much problems with the COVID virus. For example, Sweden did not close their schools at all. They didn't lose one single student. And their rate of infection was no more or less than other countries that were giving injections and shutting schools down. We think that we're human. We have human cells. You realize we have more foreign cells in our bodies by a factor of 10 to 1 than human cells. We have more bacteria in us than we do human cells by a factor of 10 to 1. And those bacteria produce our 70 to 80% of our immunity. People don't know this. We talk about education, about learning about these things. They're very important. On Monday, I had four fellows come to the house. They were going to cut down a big tree. And they worked hard. They were good guys. Only problem was every one of them, perhaps one, didn't smoke. And what they were drinking, Coca-Cola, right? Nutrition illiteracy. You know, we read on our labels, that what we're eating and what we're drinking has natural flavors. You know what that means, natural flavors? That means that they start with either a vegetable or a meat base. And as long as they start with a vegetable or meat base, they can add anything else to it. So beware of natural flavors. There are foods allowed, or preservatives and additives to our food that are not allowed in Canada, are not allowed in Europe. An example is high fructose corn syrup. It's not allowed in Europe.
Bob, sorry to slow you down for a moment, but what I'm hearing is it sounds like you would like to see more integrated health curriculum into what the school district is currently doing, that you feel like there is the option to get resources to create these curriculums from outside the district, and that it feels like that you have some connection with people in order to maybe rally some of these resources. So moving forward from here, what do you think would be the best plan?
Well, I understand there's hurdles to doing something like this, and I know it wouldn't be easy. But the question is, how important is it? Does it have as much weight as mathematics or English or anything else? Health?
Well, what I can tell you is that most of what we teach is constrained by both state and federal standards.
Exactly. But look at look where the condition of the health of our children and of our adults. So what we're doing is not adequate. It's a standard, but it's a minimal standard.
Okay.
We need to do more. And let me just tell you one more. Let me just give you a little bit of something that happened recently.
Okay.
I was over at administrative offices about a week ago, and I was talking about this very subject. And one of the workers said, you know, I'm paraphrasing a little bit. He said, "I wish someone had drummed into me about what it takes to become and stay healthy." And the key phrase in that sentence is drummed into me. What that means is you have to start early, and you have to be repetitive, and you have to touch on all these things all the way through K through 12. It has to be reinforced by people who have taken the wrong steps, people who can come in and say, this is what I did and this is what happened to me. And it's reinforced, and it needs to be reinforced. And what that does, it changes how people think, how the students think about their health, that they must realize that they have control of their health, not the healthcare industry, not the pharmaceutical industry. They themselves. They have to become nutrition literate, understand how their bodies function.
Mr. Umbrecht, oh, sorry.
Yes.
I thought you were, I would like to offer a next step of, first of all, this is a fantastic document that I don't think anybody would disagree with. I think that one of the things is, where are these things being taught currently? Because we have a lot of, I can attest, I'm not going to sit here and say that they are all touched upon in our current curricula. But just looking at it and knowing some of the lessons off the top of my head that I've either seen or heard about, it might be helpful to actually, put together a matrix of where and when these current topics, if they are being taught. Would that be helpful for you?
Yes. As far as my research goes, I don't think there is a program out there that is comprehensive K through 12 that starts at kindergarten and builds on previous knowledge, so that at the end you have a structure and a body of knowledge that those seniors, when they graduate, they really know how their bodies function. They know what choices they make is about how that's going to affect their health. And I think we owe that to the students. They should have that going forward.
I just don't want to work under the assumption that we currently aren't doing any of these.
Oh, I think we are.
Yeah, I want to make sure
Sure.
we have a
But
good,
my-
clear
my-
understanding of what
Right.
already we
Right.
do have in place and when that occurs, and that might help us make any sort of determinations of adjustments moving forward.
And you wouldn't see results necessarily right away, but down the road there'll be results.
I did share the health standards with all of the board members via email, and so one of the things that as you digest standards is you will see what you're talking about is sort of a building from K to 12. standards are designed to do that. So they'll hit benchmark years like a third grade, and they'll show how certain things should happen in K, 1, and 2 to get to that point as a third grader. So those are certainly worth, I think, reviewing as well, to know that we are responsible for teaching all of those things, and that does backwards map, if you will. Hey, we want a student by 12th grade to know this, so here's all the steps to get there.
We appreciate you sharing this with us.
Also, just like to add one thing, I think a curriculum like this could include also life skills, some life skills that really run parallel with both mental and physical health would be included also.
Mr. Armbruster, I see financial literacy, and one thing is we have already begun those conversations about what that financial literacy course at the high school would look like, so.
Okay, that takes us to the finance section of our agenda. And so, Mr. Ryan, if you could bring the slides back up, that would be helpful. Thank you. And I apologize, but we did add a slide today that didn't hit the agenda, but we do need to have for approval next week, so we at least wanted to just speak on that.
We reached out to various vendors for our cafeteria, our kitchen hoods, for cleaning, degreasing, so forth like that. We have an out because it's all part of the cafeteria, so I just wanted to, and unfortunately, we didn't have this before the agenda went live. Any questions? Mr. George reviewed it also to make sure, so everybody's on board. Thanks.
Okay, then we'll move to taking a look at the preliminary budget that will be on next week's agenda as a voting item. So first wanted to talk a moment about revenues, then take a look at expenditures and what that leaves us with as a deficit. So we've talked many times about how developing a budget becomes kind of more in focus as the year goes on and as we get more information about what that will look like. So earlier this spring, we projected revenues to be $45,764,107. We've gone through that pie chart and that breakdown before, with the majority of those revenues coming here locally. Then next would be state, and our smallest amount would be federal dollars. We are now increasing that projection by $82,661 related to higher anticipated interest earnings. So kind of tightening that deficit a little bit from the revenues perspective. If you take a look at the next place, the next slide, you'll see where we've tightened. We have a little more control here on the expenditure side to some extent. You do know that our staffing takes up about 70% of our expenditures. And so last time we did speak about how over the last 2 years we have been able to cut 20 positions, so about $2 million to the budget. But we did some tightening here over the last month. So earlier this spring, we presented a projected deficit of $789,000. So we just saw that we increased our revenues by about $80,000. We've also done some cuts in proposed expenses. Board members, in your folders, you'll see a specific line item listing of where we found those exact reductions. So we have reduced expenditures by $202,967. And those are just some of the things. Kudos to Mr. George, who's with us this evening. A lot of the savings we found were in buildings and grounds. So a couple of things. First of all, he and his team are doing a lot of work in-house that in the past we have had to bring people in to do. So when we're building a budget, we do look at what has been spent in past years. And so we were able to go back and trim that area because Mr. George and his crew are not spending as much as was spent in past years. We are also able to, similar to what we want to do with NWEA mapping, we are able to do some pre-purchasing of supplies for next year because he's managed his budget so well for this year. So later in our meeting today, we're going to speak about some of our summer projects. And so he's able to purchase supplies for our summer projects on this year's budget rather than next year's budget. So we now are presenting a projected deficit of $586,190. If you go to the next slide, I do want to share that one opportunity the board would have with this $202,000 of savings is to place that savings in a line item for cap reserve. And so when we're thinking about a capital reserve fund, we're thinking about, you could go back, Mr. Ryan. So when we're thinking about a sorry, it's dancing around. When we're thinking about a capital reserve fund, we're thinking about setting money aside for facilities needs. And since we're currently starting a long-range planning process, now is the time to be thinking about future capital improvements, deferred maintenance that might be needed on buildings like the middle school for the future. So one opportunity the board would have right now is to put some money aside for savings, knowing that we'll need that in the future, and what we save now would only grow in expense into the future. So if we made the choice to place that $202,000 into capital reserve within the budget, now if you go to the next slide, this is just a reminder of kind of what the Act 1 index is, but we've talked through that. So if you go one more, this is just a reminder of, so our Act 1 index for this year was 6.1%. So if you recall, we kind of looked all the way through that last month. Even with putting money into capital reserve for the future, we could have a balanced budget with a 3.5% tax increase. So that could close our deficit and allow us to put money into cap reserve. So certainly open to conversation. We're only at preliminary budget time at this point in time, but we have, looked to see how we can get tighter in both revenues and expenditures, and that's where we've arrived. So our recommendation at this point would be to balance the budget with a 3.5% tax increase.
Thoughts?
Just one thing that's important to know, every dollar you spend out of capital reserve saves money in the future because you're not borrowing that money and paying interest on it for 20 years. And so there's sort of that kind of measured approach to saving money. If you think about, I think about my household, right? If we're saving up so that we don't have to, we need a new car, every dollar we can put towards a down payment that isn't taken out on loan, we're saving money down the road for however long that loan lasts. So being able to put money aside in capital reserve is something that is done in many, many school districts for that very reason, so that when we do face a renovation project or a building project or whatever might come of the long-range planning, we're able to spend money without actually, paying somebody else for that money, if that makes sense.
With the long-range planning, are we currently putting like a maintenance schedule in place for our facilities that we currently have?
So we certainly maintain them right now. Part of long-range planning, one of the things that the companies have been asked to present is what would it look like to maintain our current facilities, along with like other sort of, reallocations of buildings, and what would that look like. So that will provide us information on, if we were to stay exactly the same, what are those costs into the future. Certainly with the age of our buildings, even if we stay with the exact same structure, there are going to be maintenance costs coming in the future. If anyone's visited the middle school, they can appreciate that for sure. So it seems like not only with starting the study, but just the reality of where we are in the district. This idea of like saving for a future problem, the future problem will probably be here sooner than later. So similar to like at your home, you're thinking I probably need new windows soon, or a new roof, or the new car, new tires for the car. I start saving now so I can buy that in cash, or closer to buying that in cash when the time comes.
Mr. George, is there any immediate things that you know that need attention right now?
Do we have any immediate needs in the district? Like if you're thinking about the middle school, what kind of problems come to mind?
No, we've managed to keep everything functioning very well. We found that we can do most things in-house. Constantly finding out who companies do it for us.
The control system. Yeah, we did. Mr. George did a presentation about the control system when Mr. Eichert was leading buildings and grounds. So we have spoken about that, and we've put that on the back burner, saying we wouldn't make an investment into a control system till we had a better sense of longevity of the buildings. But that ultimately we would need to do at the middle school or have a plan to go somewhere else. We did have a little bit of foundational problems at the middle school that Mr. George was able to correct that hopefully don't expand as well in terms of something concerning there this year.
These capital funds that we would move the money to, could that also be used in buildings for upgrading student safety and security, or is that, because it's labeled as something different, could it be used for that?
It could
If it's
be.
infrastructure, yes.
Yes. It
Okay.
could be used for that. It can't be used for like furniture, things that could come out of the buildings, but stuff that
Attachments.
like is attached to the building, if that makes sense. So like glass coating, those things. Yes.
Some sort of facilities.
Right.
I know, we obviously, in the last plan that sort of, we purchased the land across the street, the idea there was potentially athletic fields at that point in time, and if that remains our plan, capital reserve could certainly be used to pay for those costs as well.
We, I know there are some, we don't know exactly what other districts in the region are doing as far as tax
did-
increase.
I did
saw that
share
in the
that, I would
bottom,
say, and it's in the folder for you
Yeah.
as well.
but is, not everybody's said they're
Not
gonna do
everyone's
this or
voted yet,
that,
yes.
But it seems like that in general, the trend is everybody's doing between 1 or 4.5.
Yeah, I would say between 1.5 and 4.5 is
Yeah.
very common in the last couple years in this region. And there are a couple districts that have already voted. I know one very close by is at 3.75% right now this year. And again, that Act 1 does make, that's sort of the suggestion in terms of like for your specific district, how to keep up with the times. And so we were at 6.1. We felt like 3.5 is not asking people to obviously go all the way to that level, but is not allowing us to fall behind. I think one of the things to think about too, when you if you have to dip into fund balance without having any percentage, similar to like the roof being more expensive because you're paying, it ultimately becomes a larger tax increase. You're pushing that burden into the future.
Yep.
So I think we do have to be cautious about that too. When there are years of none, it could lead to years of a larger increase in the future. I've sort of heard that like 1 mil of dipping in now is like 2 mils of increase in the future.
And I mean, we could, I mean, not that we can't vote here, but like other districts have already passed their tax increases. What's the sort of absolute timeline for us?
So the preliminary budget, we're asking for the preliminary budget to be passed next week. The budget can be adjusted from that.
Yeah.
So the preliminary budget doesn't have to become the ultimate one. But then we would in June need to pass the budget. because that is when it's due to the state. And there's some like turnaround work. So with our meeting being the second Wednesday of June, like the way June sits, that's actually a little later into June. So we really need it to be then so that Mike has time to do his work in getting it to the state. So that's really our timeline, is preliminary this month with final approval next month. And Mike is currently building for preliminary around the 3.5%, but we certainly are bringing it here for discussion tonight.
Thoughts?
The various clubs that are in the school, let's say they have projects they like to have raise some funds for whatever they'd like to do. Where do those funds come from?
They raise the money themselves, Mr. Umbrack. That's not part of the general fund.
Right.
They have their fundraisers. That's not our money. That's directly
their
student money.
So they're
That
free
stays
to-
in their
they're free to
coffers.
decide how they could raise money.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
And certainly just thank you to many of our boosters clubs, because they, although we have line item budgets for the football team, the track team, the band, those things, all that are offered to those students come from that boosters work too. So for example, our band is getting well-deserved new uniforms. It's been a long time since they got them in this current budget, but the band boosters has raised a considerable amount of money to subsidize that, so the cost to the district is lower, and they purchase many new instruments on an annual basis for the district, so students who can't fund their own instrument have access to instruments. So we fund the band program to some level, but like the boosters makes it the exceptional program that it is. And that could be said for many clubs and organizations, all of our athletic teams. So certainly just kudos to all the people running those booster clubs. But they all have their own bank accounts, and they all have to have their own leadership that makes, like, presidents, treasurers, that make those decisions about how that money is spent.
I had brought up a suggestion, not to, belittle it or berate it, but about a service club. A service club that would be involved. And I just noticed, I read on the paper not too long ago, it was over in Sunbury, I was telling Mr. Gump about it, where it was brought up, one of the board members brought it up about a service club of doing things in the community. Whether it's cleaning up, helping out here or there, whatever. And I think it would be something that would be potentially bring a decent amount of funds in for that particular group in terms of service to the community and even service to individuals with help from mentors when necessary. They would have like you said, they could have the president, secretary, whatever they need to do to form a club. But I think such a club would be kind of unique. Although they did start one over there, but it was more of a community type thing with many students involved. We could do the same thing, but also have individual people, individual entities that need certain things done that could have a mentor who knows how to do certain, whether it be plumbing, electrical, carpentry, gardening, whatever it might be. And then it wouldn't be a charged fee. It would just be whatever the person would want to donate.
Well, Dr. Gump is going to be speaking next month to the board about the protocols that he's put in place around establishing clubs and the amount of student interest we need, and like a probationary period, because there's certainly a lot of funds expended to that, and we want to make sure we're always adjusting to what students' interests are. So he's put a lot of time and effort into really putting some clear procedures in place around extracurricular organizations, and he is set to speak about that and some of the clubs that students are interested in adding at the high school. We'd really try to let that interest be student driven and make sure that we're, having something so everyone has a place that they feel at home and connected at the high school. So he will be speaking about that process.
So are there any thoughts about the tax increase itself for the preliminary? I guess one of the things I want to test the temperature of, are people comfortable with the level? Are they more or interested in less? And are they sort of relatively comfortable with the idea of putting some of the money for capital expenses?
I think the first question you want to be able to answer when you talk about a tax increase is, have we made absolutely sure that we have reduced as much of the expenditures as possible without impacting the programming. I think this is, I'm not saying that we haven't done that, but that's the question that has to be asked out loud. If we're going to say we're going to put an additional financial burden on the community, we got to make sure we done our due diligence. I've seen countless examples of that from you guys, and so, but I think that just saying that out loud is important. And anybody else who wants to contribute to that, answer that question, would love to hear from them. My perception is that you guys have, but would be curious to hear what folks have to say.
Yeah, I mean, the last discussion we had, I think we were more talking, or the feeling was closer to 6%, closer to, to make up the fact that we've I mean, you guys have basically cut that in half at this point. Obviously, if we can continue to do more before then, that's great, but I mean, it's definitely, we're headed in the right direction. Getting it down to 3.5 is much better than 6, obviously. That's a no-brainer.
To answer Dr. Faulkner, we sharpened our pencils and worn those things down.
Yeah.
There's,
I mean, literally millions of dollars of savings.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we're talking about a balanced budget.
And I think it's also important to note that there's no federal COVID dollars in this budget, and
Right.
have been able to reduce to that level and make up for that. And that's been infused for the last, 4 years.
A big piece of why this would be necessary to raise taxes at all, just to make it clear to everyone, is that in the end, the cost of everything has gone up.
Yep.
And so the school too has to bear that cost, just like individuals have to bear that cost.
and we always know we have future costs as well.
Correct. Well, that's a number that's smaller than inflation has been at times.
Is there any way to, I guess you'd say like when next year rolls around, is there any way to put something in place where you don't go backwards? So like say the 3.5% is approved, like next year when it comes around, it can't be no tax increase? Like it has to at least be that, you know what I mean? Like I know there has to be discussion and, I know that aspect of it, but you know what I mean? Is there anything that could be put into place that, last year we raised it 3.5%, so next year, it can't go below 3.5%? You know what I mean?
There's strict guidelines on doing the budget from the
Yeah.
state. So the 3.5% automatically pulls over to 3.5% for the calculation for next year. So then there's a rebalancing because we have two different counties, which makes it very complex. But, I mean, depending what that Act 1 index is, that's the law. You can't go above the Act 1 index.
Yeah,
The board
yeah.
could decide.
Yeah, my question was, I know, obviously, next year, stuff isn't going to be cheaper, so
Sure.
it's not
Right.
like the index is, we raised it 3.5 this year, next year, the index can be 2.5. Possible, but I don't
You
see
don't
it.
foresee that.
So, I'm just saying, if it's 3.5 this year, would it be possible, to, keep it in place that it's at least 3.5 next year?
At that tax rate or
Yeah,
another?
yeah, at that
Yeah,
you know what I
it
mean?
would- It would require, you can lower, but.
You can lower.
That's another board resolution to lower the tax rate.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
it would start at that unless, and it would be that if you pass the next fiscal year's budget without increasing taxes, but without a resolution to.
Yeah, so I guess.
So you're saying you'd
simpler
like there to be a
aspect.
motion that we always are at least 3%?
Yeah,
Is that
yeah,
what you're saying? That's what he's
when
saying.
the budget is built next year, it's 3 point. You know
I
what
was gonna say, I
mean?
think that's what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah. I just didn't know how to put it into
I think
words.
that would, the board ultimately does decide that
Yeah.
percentage. There wouldn't be a policy right now that would say a certain percentage. So it
Yeah.
would be an annual discussion based on the Act 1 index.
Yeah.
Unless the board so chose to make some sort of policy that we could, our next item is PSBA, but we could run through and see if there's any,
And
but-
that also depends upon
The unassigned fund balance
Yeah.
is another rule. You can't go above 8% of the unassigned fund balance if you're raising taxes.
Yeah.
So, that also constrains the district.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of.
I was just thinking because the examples on the sheet here, Millville or That's not, I mean, everybody's kind of like Mifflinburg is 4.5%, 4.49%. You know what I mean? Which obviously they have had discussions just like everybody does. But like it's kind of like always,
Consistent.
yeah,
Yes.
consistent
And,
with,
and again, there are some districts, I think I mentioned this before, who
Yeah, I'm-
almost inherently just go to the Act 1 index.
Right.
yeah,
But it's not it's not their
It's
policy.
not
It
their
is not their
policy, but I
policy.
think
I'm
it's
not
their
sure if it would be
routine,
great
if
for us
you
to
will.
Yeah.
That to balance their budget, they just need to go to index on an annual basis. So
Yeah.
there are a lot of people that naturally do that.
But this is, the point you're making actually is more about board consistency
Yes.
and consistency.
oh yeah,
of
I get that, yeah,
process.
oh yeah, I
And-
get
And
that.
Danville traditionally has not had a stable and consistent board.
Yeah.
And so if we can turn this into a stable and consistent board, something like that can certainly exist because the board as a whole will have an agreement that you know,
Yeah.
what we're doing is, this is the general philosophy of the way that we do things, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's, I get that aspect of it too, yeah.
And I guess the issue is even if we created some form of policy, the next board to come along could just get rid of the policy.
Yeah, oh yeah,
So it's not binding.
yeah, no,
in
there's
There's
no way
not
to
a
set in
like
stone, yeah,
permanent,
Yeah.
right?
We were just trying to get out of the discussion of constantly talking about taxes every
Yes.
year. Come around, had everybody upset on a 24-hour basis year round. Got to get it out there, get it set and move. And let 'em know.
Well, I mean, if we have a consistent board who consistently thinks in sort of the same direction, I think we could reach that point.
Stuff and you keep throwing it back at me, like, yeah, here, I'm hear this again?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
That's what causes a lot of problems we don't need.
No, I think communities that do consistently do a 3 or a 4, it's kind of
Yes.
almost not in the news, quite frankly,
Yeah.
because it's just an annual expectation that you have to do that to stay with the times,
So
if you
it
will.
also
So
it also-
the last line of paper has to be expect the same next year.
But the other thing is if you, even if you
He's writing it
show
right now.
if you show a very moderate
Yeah,
increase
like
year
just-
to year,
You never have to.
then the spike doesn't feel as big. So
Yeah.
like when you go from 0 to 4, it
Yeah.
feels a lot bigger than if
Yeah,
you're.
so like if you go, you know, next year, say next year rolls around, it's 4, 4.5, you know, it's not like, you know, or if there's a year miraculously where it can be 3% or 2.5, you know what I mean? Like, it has to, I don't know. I think it definitely, like Sandy said, it's, you know, depends on everybody that's here ultimately, but
Right.
like if it stays in a median somewhere, I mean, people will be a lot, you know, I mean, you're still gonna hear about it, but they'll be a lot more forgiving about it.
Well, Tyler, you have a 4-year term, right?
Yeah. 4 times.
Just
4
for the
times.
public record, none of us are exempt from paying the increase. Just
That is
so
correct.
everybody else
That's
knows.
true.
We are,
Yeah,
we
yeah,
are all
yeah.
taxpayers,
Right.
so,
Jason and I are too. So.
yes. Everybody's, yes.
No retirees don't pay tax.
Well, you,
Not
There is
to
a rebate.
belabor the
I
point,
know. I get mine back.
but I'm getting the feeling at least the present members are okay with this level. I mean, because it seems like it's the minimum amount that balances the budget, and it's the minimum amount we can increase where there's also some more in the capital fund.
So even though we hate to have this discussion because that 5-letter word's very dirty and nobody likes to hear it,
Right.
I think this shows as a board that we are financially responsible.
Correct.
That like what you just said, that we are able to raise it a minimum amount and produce the district with a balanced budget.
Well, and I think that's a credit to the administration as well with the amount of cutting that they've done of unnecessary costs. I mean, literally, when we're talking about this, we're talking about millions of dollars,
6 million.
so.
I think that's the discussion is do we believe we are being good financial stewards with the money that we are given by taxpayers? And if we have cut as many expenditures as possible without sacrificing the excellent programming that we offer, and are also able to balance the budget by increasing taxes to the very minimum amount, I think we're doing the right thing.
I'm just going to note that prior boards used taxpayer dollars to feed board members, among other things, and we have cut that out of the budget. So I'm just going to note that we are
I'm
not,
gonna be getting a little
Yeah.
petty.
that even we are sacrificing
Right.
in that sense.
Well, that just
Yeah,
means
no,
you
that's-
pizza.
Yeah, now you pay to feed
To be
us.
very clear, that was not taxpayer dollars, that was my money.
So it's part of the president's duties, right, to feed the board? Let's put that in policy.
Where's our pizza?
I will be personally catering every meeting from now on. So, all right, so it sounds like people in general are okay with this. I just want to make sure, because this is always a sensitive topic, that there isn't further comment.
Dangerous topic.
What was that?
Very dangerous topic.
Okay. So it sounds like people are okay with this. Perfect. Let's move on to 4.2, PSBA renewal. Unfortunately, the individual who requested that this be on the agenda is not here tonight.
Yeah, I'll just share, and we can certainly even just wait until June if he would like it to be more of a part of the discussion. So PSBA, you probably recognize those initials because you had to do some training with them. That's the School Boards Association, and they help us have access to board docs, to policy updates, to procedural updates. So they essentially help us sort of stay functioning as a school board and correct in the law. They provide training to school board members. They provide training to Mrs. Faust that she's able to take advantage of as the board secretary. And so there's just an annual membership fee that the board would vote to say, yes, we want to continue being PSBA members. You will see in your folder that you have 2 documents, what our dues invoice is and what the membership levels are. So there's a standard membership and there's an all access package. The difference in pricing is about $4,000. If you go with the standard membership, you can then buy kind of a la carte, if you will, the other items. So you can see and hear what you can get. So this was brought up tonight just because it will be time, at least by July 1, for us to renew to have this again for next year.
What do we do now?
So we currently do the all access package.
Do we feel that
I certainly think that we at least need some level. They're
Yeah, of course.
I don't want to speak poorly of PSBA. They're a little tricky in that the things that you need are not all in standards, so you'd have to buy some set, like the most critical things, if you will. But like Board Docs is the program that runs our agenda and stores all of our board minutes and all of those things for perpetuity. And certainly one of their biggest services is recommendations about board policy. So like, for example, as technology security would change over time, they would send to us, it's probably time to update that policy. If there's a new regulation around even like suicide prevention, those kind of things, they're gonna send their recommended language to help keep us on the straight and narrow, if you will. And then I certainly think that the trainings are very valuable. So that would just be something that we need to be paying by early July.
Is this something that's routinely a voting item?
So it hadn't been a voting item for the last few years. So last year I did not put it on because previously it was just automatically done, but I was asked to make it a voting item. But it has not for several years been a voting item.
Okay. 4.3, transportation studies.
I was also asked to share the most recent transportation study. So someone had asked for us to conduct one, but that would be a board vote, and there'd have to be like a clear purpose for what we are wanting to study, if you will. It had been suggested in a previous finance meeting that this might be something we ultimately pair with long-range planning, so when we think about what the configuration of buildings will be. But I do have in your folders a study from TransFinder, and just wanted to share that the board did commission a transportation study by TransFinder in 2022 and paid $5,000 for this study that you see here to examine any ways to consolidate bus runs. And so in that study, with starting times as they exist now, it was recommended that the district could go down 2 runs. One of those runs was reinstated by the board last year. So like ultimately down 1 run from where 2022 was. This study also said that if starting times between secondary and elementary were 60 to 65 minutes apart, so lengthier than they are now, and something that we'd have to really consider before we did to families who might have a high school kid watching an elementary kid before they get out the door, kind of a thing. That they would be able to reduce 6 runs, and if starting times were 90 minutes apart, they could be reduced by 8 runs. This study was not commissioned to study cost savings around K to 12 busing, so it only looked at busing still remaining elementary or secondary. The board in 2022 determined to keep bus rounds other than those 2, reducing those 2 the same, with starting times the same for families. Where our secondary does start before our elementary, but not like an hour or an hour and a half apart for families. So that was the study that was conducted in 2022. I think pairing it with long-range planning is probably a good idea, but certainly we'll follow the lead of the board if you feel like a transportation study needs to be put out for bid prior to that time.
So I guess obviously you guys were all expecting to probably hear something from me on this subject. I think one of the biggest challenges that transportation faces overall is our district, because it is very big in square miles. And, you know, we go almost to Elysburg, we go out past Washingtonville, so it's a broad area, and obviously our biggest challenge is time. Partly because I think there's this preconceived notion in the district that students can only be on the bus for an hour, which is absolutely 110% not written anywhere in any school bus document. There are children in areas in different districts that are on the bus for upwards of an hour and a half and 2 hours, which, you know, that's a lot for a little kid. But unfortunately, these are the challenges we face. And a bigger challenge that we face in transportation is lack of drivers, which we face that challenge almost on a daily basis in the district. And I don't see that getting any better. So I have asked Mrs. Reno many times to figure out how we can do more with less, because that's the direction we're heading in. So I think one thing that we could possibly look at is a bigger gap in the starting time, somehow to make that work, because there are some bus runs just even in our own fleet that could be combined if there were time to do that. And that would help, obviously, because we're pretty staffed and we're in a good spot, but I know there's a couple of the other contractors in the district that aren't. And like I said, I don't see it getting any better. So it is something I think that we need to look at sooner than later, just so we don't get into a position where we have to make phone calls where we have no buses for that particular day, for that particular run. And that is happening in some areas where they almost have a rolling schedule of like where bus X won't run today or this week because they don't have drivers to fulfill it. I wish I could wave a magic wand and come up with the answer, but unfortunately I don't have that, but I have some ideas, so. I think one of the things that we can do is, like I mentioned earlier, if we can come up with a time schedule that works, we can combine some of the buses together. Maybe not all of them K through 12 would work, but there are some buses in geographic areas that are not full by any stroke of the imagination. They're, you know, we have buses out that are hauling elementary students that have 22 and 23 kids on them on a 72 passenger bus. And that bus overlaps another bus that hauls middle school, high school kids with the same amount of kids on it. So you're at 45 kids maybe on a 72 passenger bus. I mean, there's an example of one bus could do
that run.
Yeah, I do think that if we were going to examine transportation, if we were just looking at tightening, we're probably going to see pretty similar data. And a 90-minute gap is a really big deal for families with not tons of run change. But examining, and I'm not saying we go to K to 12, but examining that and seeing what that would get us, because I think that's a really fair point that right now every neighborhood, every house in the community has 2 different buses that technically have to run that route to get, you know, our K to 5 kids and our 6 to 12 kids. And so just having that data to understand what would that do to cost, what would that do to routes, could be worthwhile. That would be its own study, but that could be a worthwhile just information for us to have.
And I think you'll see that more in rural areas.
Yes.
Obviously, around Geisinger, the Red Lane area and stuff like that, there are a significant amount of kids that do use the bus
Sure.
at elementary and at middle school, high school level. So obviously, you couldn't fit them all on a bus unless you had a time gap that you could run the same bus up there to do both runs. But I think out in the country, where there are some of these buses that run with 15, 18, 20 kids on them, there shouldn't be any reason why we couldn't put them all in one and bring them to school. I understand we have the time gap because it takes 15 minutes or so to get from the primary school to Liberty Valley. But again, if you place the bus in the right place to start in the afternoon and have it drop off the right way, the right direction in the morning, it could flow and it could work really well.
So you're really kind of painting the picture of like two primary options, which one would be a longer stagger time. I heard you say that between the longer time between the starts,
Mhm.
or explore K-12 runs.
And like I said, I think you could maybe do one or the other or put both together. Because there are some, like I said, there are some bus runs where you could take your K to 5 and put your 6 to 12 together and put them in one vehicle. And essentially, if you could make that happen, you could probably make the time schedule now. And it wouldn't fit everywhere, obviously, but I think some of your more rural routes, you could put them together.
I-
One time in this district ran on one bus. I started in '88 and up into 2000, I'm about somewhere in that area.
K-12.
K to 12.
Now, we talked about this earlier, and obviously back then, we weren't as populous as we are now either.
Populations grew a little.
Sure.
What changed that?
Population growing.
No,
No,
I
the-
mean,
the
what,
busing.
What
changed?
changed the busing carry was, I think,
Yeah.
at that time in life in the school system, and any teachers or principals that are in the room that have been involved in the district for a long time, I think there was a big push for an anti-bullying campaign. And I think our superintendent at the time thought that that would be the best approach to kind of carry on that
Separating.
campaign, was to separate the kids. I can tell you from experience that there were less problems on the bus when K through 12
Yep.
were on the same bus
Yep.
than there are now. And I invite any one of you to ride with me, and I'll prove it to you on a daily basis.
So we could certainly have this be something we put out to bid that the board could obviously look at before that happens, where we could be looking to get those answers if that's the direction the board wanted to
And like
go.
I said, I'd be more than willing to sit down with Mrs. Reno, with you, with Jason, with Mike, and we could all sit down and we could brainstorm on this together and save money.
I mean, the amount of money we spend on busing, it deserves a look, obviously, because there's savings. If there's savings that
Sure.
can be there,
Well-
Do we think that we would need to do another, that we can't use this for where we are today? Is that what we're saying, that we would need to redo, we would have to?
This
these-
study did not at all look at K to 12 busing.
Right.
So I don't think that it gives us sort of any more information than
Gotcha.
this. Quite frankly, often studies are only as good as the questions you pose for them to answer. And so I think one of the things we could do is sit down together to say, what do we actually like want as possible? So similar to like long range planning right now, we're saying we want everything from like keeping current buildings to like all the things. What are the costs? So I think we could have an opportunity to sit down with Daryl and Laura and say like, what are our ideas? How do we put that into a proposal so we actually get all the answers we're looking for?
But at the end of the day, all the buses go to a particular spot.
So basically, the way it's broke out now is you have buses that go to Liberty Valley and primary, you have buses that go to middle school and high school. So essentially, like Dr. Need had said earlier, you have two buses that run through the same neighborhood, pick up the same families of kids if they have older siblings, younger siblings, and they're going to different schools, but basically doing the same job.
So like my kids.
My thought is in rural areas, if you have the buses have to go out, say, to Ewesburg, like you say, or out to Washingtonville.
Mhm.
If there's a safe location that would save money to leave a bus in a particular area where it would save on time and gasoline and whatnot, leave it there so the driver would go, park the car in a safe area, pick the bus up, and wouldn't have to drive as far as coming from here or wherever they're parked to go there.
Most of our drivers keep their buses at their houses.
Yeah, so
Oh, they
like
do.
bus 22. it's not true anymore. It's the bus that picks up one group of my kids is parked a half a mile from my house during the day. And that's where she leaves from, right? That was Charity when Charity drove that bus. But like the point that's being made right now is like my son will go up and have to be up there, at 6:55 for the middle school pickup. Gets picked up. And then my girls are almost an hour later when they get picked up by a separate bus running the same route. And so the question is balancing the amount of time children are spending on the bus and the efficiency of getting, say, if all my kids got on the bus together, what would that mean and what would that look like? Or would it be that my youngest and my oldest got on the bus together and not my middle kid because she's going somewhere else, right? So there's a lot of different combinations where it might work, even if you have to run both buses, that might be more efficient.
And even the time frame thing, like I know that Doral has 2 buses that go to Riverside with middle school, high school, and one goes straight across the bridge and one turns left after the bridge. And one bus has 6 kids on it, and the other bus might have 10 or 12 kids on it. So if you can kind of have leniency with the time on the bus, that bus can very easily go from one side of Riverside to the other to take that group of kids home.
I will say the idea, though, of my kids spending 180 minutes on the bus each day is not terribly palatable to me, right?
Yeah.
So there would have to be some good thought, and it would have to be, I don't want my kids spending multiple hours right around in the back of the bus. They already don't enjoy it. I can only imagine.
Yeah, we don't want them on there for
I was-
180 minutes either.
I was saying,
No, but I'm thinking theoretically.
Yeah, yeah, I get what you're saying.
They were
Yeah.
90 and
90 was
90.
the upside, right?
Yeah.
That's 180 minutes a day that my kids are riding around on the bus.
Yeah, I can say that
And you don't
60,
want my
I would
kids on
agree.
there for-
60 is not a law, but I would say that's a guideline we've tried to follow just in terms of like if a bus runs longer than 60, we are probably getting a call about it because it's like, my
Oh,
kid's
yeah.
7,
Yeah.
they've had a really long day. And so it needs to be taken into consideration, I think, just length of a kid's day, going to extracurricular,
Yeah.
like they got to get to soccer practice or whatever.
I leave
We're
here.
looking
I
at
leave
that.
here and can't wait to get to Busy Little Beavers.
Yeah, in some
that's-
circumstances,
Mile and a half down the road.
in some circumstances, to your point though, Dr. Need, that's something you can't really help because of where the people live.
For sure. I think and we would try to be kind about that, but there's some routes that, like, you have to be at the 60. We can't make yours a 20 or
Right,
whatever.
right.
How do the administrators, not trying to put anybody on the spot, but how do the administrators feel about K-12 busing? Yeah,
It sounds like it's worth looking at
yeah, I agree.
and at least having a discussion and seeing what the consequences are.
So Laura's out this week, but I'll connect with you. I think we could put our heads together to design, like, what questions do we want studied, and then we could bring that back to the board if that feels like a good next step.
Yeah, absolutely. I just see what we go through, not so much us, but what the district goes through on a daily basis as far as we just kind of throw it against the wall and see what sticks. And fortunately, it's worked very well.
Sure.
But rather than wait till it becomes a problem, I think we should start looking at it now so we can kind of
No fair.
nip it in the butt before it happens.
Stop throwing stuff at the wall.
Yeah, let's not do that.
Well, some days you have to. But I'd rather not if we didn't have to.
The TransFinder software has the ability to, I call it, blow it up and do something like you're saying in a scenario situation. And since all the kids are located in that software, they'll walk you through how to do that. So,
And that's-
Look like this transponder where they They don't know nothing.
And that's a good basis, but we.
I would agree this is kind of nonsense.
But
what I
but
thought.
to give her a compliment, Laura is an excellent person to have in the position she's in because she knows this district probably better than anybody
She
else.
does.
Yes.
And I don't
She's
think
amazing.
TransFinder could design a software package that could
No.
do
It's
better
better
than
than
she
her
does.
brain. I agree.
Yeah,
I
you're
would
right.
agree with
On
you.
the fly.
Yeah. So I mean, I definitely think using her as a resource and getting together and brainstorming. I mean, if we have to use TransFinder to maybe tweak it a little bit, then. But I think that we have enough resources in house between experience that we have that we could probably figure this out, or at least come to a good conclusion.
I think that's
Maybe
great.
not the best, but come to a good one.
That's great. The next committee category is long-range planning. And just one item to share here. And I think that we just have, I think, one of our long-range planning members with us today, but my recommendation would be that we probably do need a separate meeting for that. So if you go to the next slide, Mr. Ryan, I shared with you last time that we had a pre-proposal meeting on March 27th. We did have 16 companies represented at that meeting. Proposals were due today by 11, and we've received 4 proposals. They're very detailed and talk about what those different companies can do for us in terms of this study. So I think that will require its own meeting to review those proposals to determine what to bring back to the board would be my recommendation.
Sounds fine.
Then we'll move into the category of buildings and grounds. And our first item within buildings and grounds is Mr. George had come to us and has provided this opportunity for students in previous districts where he's worked. And we'd like to present an opportunity to have summer work for our high school students. We would have an application and a hiring process to give them that professional experience and have a few student summer workers to do light custodial work this summer. We would not take any hours away from union membership, and it would help us fill in when a high number of our union members are taking well-earned vacation time. So certainly the end of the year in terms of people's days goes to June 30th. June is a popular vacation time, and again, very well-earned for our custodians. But this would give Mr. George an extra large crew, if you will, for the summer for all the work that happens there. So this would be a first, at least in recent history for Danville. I can't proclaim that it's never happened, and just wanted to share that with the board. And then our next item is just shout out to Mr. George and all of our building leaders. He has been working for months now to map out summer projects with each of our building leaders and knows like it's a tight timeline in the summer in terms of just the cleaning that happens in the specific projects. But he has a great mapping of those projects, and also, like I shared before, part of our cost savings is that he has pre-ordered cleaning supplies and materials for these projects on this year's budget, where we'll still come under in buildings and grounds. So some of those planned summer projects that you see, we're going to have a sidewalk installation on the grounds of the high school adjacent to the primary school. So if you're in the back of the primary school and the high school, we do parent pickup for Head Start there and for the primary school, and there's not a clear crosswalk. And so it's come to the attention of our safety committee, and so that's going to be a summer project. So there's a safe sidewalk to walk down connected to this crosswalk for parent pickup in the back of the school. Part of our safety grant was for bollards, so those will be installed over the summer by Mr. George and his team, and that will require some concrete work and all kinds of things there. Liberty Valley playground equipment installation this summer. There will be installation of visibility panels in all of our exterior doors, which is a requirement and part of our PCCD grant, and Tim and his team will be able to do that in-house, where they can take solid doors and put in visibility panels. We are adding a door in the technology support room at the middle school, and there'll be quite a bit of painting as needed across the district. Mr. George, I don't know if there's anything you want to add there about summer projects. Pretty covered, I think. But I would certainly like to thank him. He does an excellent job of planning.
The cafeteria, the high school cafeteria,
And that's all we have for buildings and grounds. Are there any questions there?
Molly, the students that are involved in helping out in these summer projects, is there a stipend involved in that?
Yes, it would be a paid position for them,
Paid for
like a summer job
They
for them.
volunteer and they volunteer to help out and they're paid to, whatever they wanna do.
Yeah, they would fill out a job application and have an interview with Mr. George and his staff, and so this would be their hired summer job.
Was this brought up to any high school students yet?
We have not shared it with high school students, but Mr. Ryan has had a high school student work in the technology department, and that's
Yeah.
been a popular position and has been really successful for us.
I have done this at other schools.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Believe it.
Makes sense. Because I know the borough hires, like 2 or 3 college, or tries to hire 2 or 3 college kids over the summer, kind of like the same deal for,
Right.
yeah.
I believe that it will be well received at, like, in my role as super and also just as a mom of teenagers. People are definitely looking for summer jobs.
Oh, yeah.
And I think this will be a great experience for students.
One thing with buildings and grounds, have we ever looked at, and I'm just asking this because I see it on a daily basis, have we ever looked at designating a path from the high school down to the DAC?
I don't know if you know Coach Brandt very well, who was a longtime cross country coach. When he had like an exit interview with me, he was like, I've been asking for 30 years for there to be a sidewalk from the high school to the DAC. Can you please make that happen? So he and I just recently had that
I
conversation.
mean, I wouldn't even know if it need to go as far as being a sidewalk, but the thing that I
Stone
see is like
path.
when I'm leaving in a bus, going down the backside of the high school, kids have kind of developed their own path along the fence of the stadium to walk down, which I'd rather them do because there are kids that walk right along the guardrail,
Yes.
and that's a very tight spot. And I think if
And
we
many students even walk on like the greenhouse side of the high school. Like that's how we have our second graders walk to swim lessons from the primary school and go down like where the nature center is. So that would certainly be like the safest route, I would say, is actually that far side of the stadium, so you're not near the road at all. So there are students doing that, but you are right. There are some students just right by the guardrail.
and I mean,
walking
even
down.
if you put a path in, it doesn't mean everybody's going to use it anyway. I mean, but I think it doesn't even have to be a sidewalk. Like if there was just like a designated path that they know that they could walk down through, I think that would be a good idea, something to look into that maybe wouldn't cost a ton of money just for
I'm
student safety
certainly open
concern.
to exploring what that would look like.
I mean, we're going to be down there digging anyway, correct, to fix the drainage problem?
The borough will be. We
Correct.
did contribute to that,
Correct.
but
Have they done that? Or what did they do
They,
down there?
they started working on that project yesterday.
Yeah,
it
it's
is finished
already?
now. I was saying they
It-
just did it this week.
It looked finished when I drove
There you
by.
go.
It
Okay.
looks real good.
That's great. I
looks
was gonna
really
say
good.
we just got that they started, but that was some quick work. That's great. All right, then our last category for the evening is athletics and extracurriculars. And Mr. Moser, I'll let you speak to these
Sure.
items.
Just an update on Athletic Hall of Fame. We have now advertised since passing the bylaws at this time. Next week, we will be recommending one new Hall of Fame committee member for approval to the board. We have some other inquiries at this time, but nothing else is finalized as of today. But again, we'll continue to recruit some people who are connected to and try to get some other people on that seat so that we can get rolling on that. Go to the next slide. Update on scoreboard. Daktronics has offered to set up their mobile display truck with a scoreboard next Tuesday, May 7th. Put in their details will be provided to the board as soon as finalized because we're going to have to use an alternative location for that demo because there is a home track meet that day, and we don't get to pick the day or time because Daktronics is moving up along the East Coast. That is the day that they will literally be here in Danville passing through, so it's kind of working through that. We will finalize that by the end of this week. By Friday, we'll communicate with board members as to when and where that demo will take place, but they'll show us not only the actual product, but some of its functionalities as well. any questions about.
That was Tuesday.
Tuesday, May 7th, yeah. Yep.
They were voting meeting that night.
Yeah, our attempt is going to be like a late afternoon, evening prior to board meeting kind of
Yeah.
time, but it's just not finalized quite yet.
And when I made the arrangements with them, when I said yes, we were available at that point in time,
It wasn't a board.
it was not a
meeting,
board
but-
meeting night, so, but we'll do our best to kind of make that as accessible as possible to all board members. If we go to the next slide, you will also see returning assistant coaches for fall sports on the agenda. I believe we included,
They're in the folders.
yeah,
yes.
in your folder, you have a list of who at this point in time is on that list. We'll be asking for approval at next week's board meeting for that. So if there are any questions or concerns, you can feel free to reach out. And then we will still have some open positions for fall assistant coaches, represented by kind of blank spaces on that sheet, will be advertised next week. And for open positions for fall assistant coaches, there would be interviews. We don't interview people if they are returning to the position. If they've been recommended back, we don't hold interviews for those on a yearly basis. But if that paid positions come open shortly, what we'll probably do is put one advertisement out to kind of reduce the cost of all open
Yes.
assistant coaching positions along with those head coaching positions, because our advertising budget has taken a hit.
Getting pricey.
Yeah, it's getting pricey to run ads. So, the next slide. This is a topic that has become certainly pretty hot button in the area, in the region. You may have seen a newspaper article last week about this, CTE student participation in athletics. So the short of it is that, unfortunately, we ran into a situation where we had a CTE student enrolled here from another district, and that student was participating on the softball team, and unfortunately, she ended up playing in a game in which we won, and we will have to vacate that victory because the sending school passed policy stating that CTE students have to return to the sending district to participate in sports. PIAA in July actually made a noted addendum that you can see on this slide. It says note that basically from now on what they'll do is they will defer to the sending school when there is a discrepancy. So if the sending school has a policy and informs the school to which they are sending that CTE student, then that's where they shall participate in sports. Unfortunately, this letter, we had a breakdown in our system, quite frankly. So this letter was not seen. And so at that point in time, for all intents and purposes, we were actually unaware. It was brought to our attention when a victory was contested by the sending school, and we immediately looked into it, found that yes, the letter had been sent. We followed up with contacting PIAA and sort of finding out what their angle was here, and quite frankly, they kind of just said that they followed the rule as such. We immediately conducted an audit of all CTE students and their participation in our sports to see if they could continue to participate on Danville Area School District teams with the proper eligibility. That has been conducted and finished. We certainly will not make this mistake again. But, and again, apologies to the softball team and all of its players and coaches, because unfortunately here, really the only people getting hurt are the kids. So we will always make, we will always try to do exactly what is best for all of our students. In this case, disagreements about how to handle these situations are not being thoroughly handled by the governing body of athletics, quite frankly. They're deflecting it back to school districts to make those decisions, and obviously not all school districts agree on how to handle those decisions. And so again, sincerely, a public apology to our softball team, those girls. That is an unfortunate byproduct of the nature of us truly having that breakdown in the system.
Was it the team that lost that protested, or the team that sent the student?
It was the team that sent the student. We played another team.
Yeah.
No.
No, we're not kidding. There's other districts that have decided to change this policy have been extremely communicative with us, and we've been able to do it without it, like remove them from the sport without a team being hurt. But there's a particular district that waited till the game was played and then reported it to
And then
PIAA.
What is their gain in doing something like that? Because
I
that seems
don't know.
specifically.
I cannot
intended.
answer. I know.
I don't
I
know.
know that particular student is, quite frankly, the one who was hurt by that, and then the byproduct of that, obviously,
It's
her
the other
teammates.
teammates as well.
Yeah, because it just seems to hurt the kids to
Yes.
be targeted in that way. And I'm trying to see what the upside is for the district that's doing it. I mean, it seems rather short-sighted, selfish, and kind of scummy of whoever that district is. Not that I know who it is to do that. Unless there's some giant upside for them that I'm missing here. Because that's certainly not about the kids. About some stupid rule pusher.
This is a rule that PIAA just recently changed?
Well,
They
please.
just
Or I remember you.
Yeah, they did just recently change it this school year. We're certainly, again, very apologetic
Yeah.
that we didn't catch that in the letter. So it was in the acceptance letter kind of final paragraph. But
this-
it's specifically becoming an issue in our region where I think some districts don't want to pay for the student to go to a CTE. So they think one way to keep a student back in their district is to not let them play sports for the school they send them to.
And we do have a few students who attend CTE programs, and we allow
let them
we
to.
allow them to participate completely in a comprehensive manner.
Yes.
As we
So
sh-
let me
as we
just name
should.
this. They are harming the student.
Yep.
Because they don't want to pay for the student to get the education that the student wants to get.
That's my best assumption. I don't know why otherwise they'd require them to come back to their district.
I mean, I'm not allowed to publicly say what I really think of that. Because it would involve
Probably
cuss
good
words and all
choice.
sorts of things that are inappropriate for me to say. But that is scummy.
And Jason, the conversation you and I had about this matter, just in the district's defense, Jason had communicated to me that the letters that the district receives regarding the CTE students on a yearly basis is a very generic letter.
It is, yes.
That basically it states the students come to the school to make us aware so we can do the proper documentation on our end. So basically, this was kind of like a
It was
slide
kind
in.
of like
It's
the
a
bottom.
it's a form
like
letter
the bottom
that
line.
it's a form letter. They added one or two new sentences in this year.
Well,
Right.
and they did it
Upon review,
purposely
it
to
was
try to
there.
I mean,
harm
it
the
was
student.
technically there, but I understand how the person that it goes through didn't see that final line. And
Well,
we've now corrected the process, but that was a new thing with a change in the law.
Well, and again, like Jason and I talked about, it's something you receive on an annual basis and several of.
Right.
So you wouldn't think to
To look for that.
check for something that somebody may have added,
Right.
But that is not a mistake we will make again.
Correct.
as long as
the
as long
best
as we
of
won't
our
make it
ability,
going
certainly.
forward, that's fine. But like I said, this really wasn't anybody's fault, maybe per se.
I would characterize it. I mean, ultimately, we oversee athletics, so I will take the blame. But ultimately, if you look at it systematically, it is a way that there was certainly a breakdown in that system, because those are not letters that normally would have been opened and read, because they would have just been filed as a CTE enrollment agreement from the sending district.
But the bigger issue here is that they are harming a student, which is the opposite of what public education is supposed to be trying to do.
There's
for the
there's
sake of a
more
few
than one
dollars.
student from that district
Correct.
affected
Yes.
Yes.
that I'm aware of.
Yes.
At
That's
least, at least
correct.
one other
Yes.
one. I don't know if there's more, but
There are.
Yes.
Yes.
We
we-
are certainly not recommending that Danville pass a policy like that. We are supporting if,
why would we?
a student gets a comprehensive education where
And
they're
we had
choosing
talked
to
about
go.
another one that comes here that can't participate in track for the same
Correct.
reason.
And the co-op would literally be, they can't participate in track because they come from a neighboring district, but that neighboring district doesn't offer track and co-ops with
Even
with-
further away
with an even
district.
further away district that borders District 2.
So this person to participate in track would have at least a 45-minute drive to get to track now, but can't participate in track here.
I mean, I'll just go on the record again saying that it's completely incompatible with what the intention of public education is supposed to be.
Certainly is a topic that is not going away anytime soon, quite frankly. It seems to have a lot more steam here than in other regions, as Dr. Need kind of mentioned. I don't know if that's because of size of districts. We all tend to be relatively smaller in enrollment sizes, and so, but it is important for the board to understand that, I think, and we also think it's important for the board to begin to develop what is our philosophy going to be when going out there. Personally, I take the stand of if we are trying to do what's right for kids,
Yeah.
we're going to support them. If it's our student going somewhere else and we're paying the tuition, I would expect athletics to be part of that tuition, and they should have that opportunity.
That makes complete sense to me.
And at this point, PIAA is saying it is the sending school's choice. So at this point, we've audited all of our CTE students, and we unfortunately have to tell students whose sending district won't let them participate that they can't participate, or the team would have to forfeit any wins that they're a part of.
This is impacting many more students?
We have,
Or
Was the total
right
number
now we
4?
have 4 students, I believe, that this is impacting. We do
they
have
have to be
students.
told they can't play the sport.
Correct.
Correct.
We do have other CTE students from districts that are taking the same stance as us that are playing as Danville athletes because their district has not
Right.
passed this policy. But we have 4 that are coming from districts that have passed this policy, so now they cannot participate in sports here.
How many of the districts in the area have a policy that is like this? Is it just one?
No,
No, I would say at least
It's,
3 at this point.
at least 3 that I'm aware of.
Huh. 5. Really? It just hurts my brain. I mean, really.
There's open enrollment.
That's the difference between our rural area and like District 1.
And I would just say in none of these cases has anybody from Danville Area School District recruited any of these students in question.
Absolutely not.
We would absolutely not do that. So ultimately, unfortunately, those students, if they remain as academic students here in Danville, in those CTE programs, will not be able to participate in sports at this time. I would anticipate that this will work through many iterations over the next several months and into a year. I could imagine that eventually there will actually even probably be legal actions and court hearings that will wind down the road and where we end up. That's looking into the crystal ball.
I mean, that's what I would expect. But it still doesn't recover the time or the,
For the kids
For
right
the kid.
now.
It does not.
right.
Um,
That's just wrong, in my opinion, but that's a different story.
The last item we have in athletics and extracurriculars is that we'll be asking for script approval for Anything Goes for the winter musical. So we do have some new board members, just so you know. When we're asking for any script approval, I have read that script so we can make sure content is appropriate and all of those things. So do spend time going through that whole musical to make sure we're good to go. So our Mr. Johnson, who's our drama director, is also looking at adding a play next year in the fall, but that script has not gone through that process yet. And then the final thing, just to share personnel-wise, we had some conversation about personnel at the last board meeting, so just wanted to make sure. I know emails can pile up. I will be communicating all of our interview processes with board members, so you're certainly invited to any interviews that we're having, and doing my best to also get resumes and cover letters into your hands so you can see those, and we'll keep communicating about those processes. So what you'll see as positions for approval at next week's meeting will be the recommendation to hire a new PE health teacher, a student services coordinator, 3 custodians, the potential of a paraprofessional. Those interviews are being held later this week, and I did send you those resumes and schedule, and then that list of returning fall assistant coaches. So those would be the recs to hire for the month of May. Have any questions about that?
And if things move along and there's something you want to fine tune with the process, the way that we're doing it,
Certainly, please reach out with any questions or needs at any point in time. I mean, about that, but about anything. That is our last item, so that takes us to board concerns and then
Yep.
public comment.
9-1, board concerns or agenda items for next time?
With, I didn't know if it would fall more building and grounds or baseball, but, or athletics, I mean. Baseball, there's some equipment for baseball that we just recently replaced all the netting to, L screens, different safety screens that are up there. They get left out all year round, basically in the dugout, which they don't fit in the dugout, so they just kind of get under the
Partially
overhang.
covered?
Yeah. And that just, I mean, the nets are expensive. They add up. There's been discussion about seeing if it's possible, and I may actually have just gotten a possible donation of a shed to put right, what we were talking about is right in the area of the electrical panel and that the spigot that's there. Kind of, there's shrubs there right now that possibly that shed it's used, so I honestly don't know what it looks like, which is why I'm saying possibly. Might not be.
Might be an eyes
But
over.
my initial thought was possibly even a school project to have one built. I don't know if that's a possibility, but there's a need to get that equipment protected instead of sitting out all year.
Summer buildings and grounds?
Well,
High
I mean,
school.
it could go into all that. Just a thought.
Brian, would we have a place to store that now, like without a new shed?
No, there's like,
It could even be like a cardboard deal, couldn't it?
We'll certainly
Just so
look
there's
into
roof
a,
on it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
into a solution, whether it's a shed or,
Yeah, we'll work on.
Yeah.
I would agree that if we've spent money, let's not let it weather.
Yeah, yeah.
the other thing, when they're out, like even sitting in the dugout,
Yeah.
Other concerns? Or items? All right. 10-1, public comment.
Evening, I had
The microphone? Yep, yeah, it's good.
had a position here to ask, or I didn't know what I could do to maybe prompt looking into something, or two things. One previously came up was the new grading system at Liberty Valley. I know I kind of discussed it earlier in the year. I figured I'd sit on it, wait till the end of the year. Obviously new board, but just wanted to know if a review was possible. Kind of like an end of the year, you've had a year with it. How did it go versus the 1 through 3 versus the 1 through 4? I just obviously personally, I'm really hung up on losing that 4 and for these kids to exceed the standard. So I didn't know how to formally request it or what I needed to do that, but that's why I'm here.
Sure.
So just if you could obviously get not only teachers, Dr. Reiner involved. I didn't know who would be involved in that decision prior to it coming up, because I don't believe the curriculum committee was involved, so I don't know how those decisions get made, if it's just strategic plan.
It is by the building level.
Okay.
So we can certainly have a building level review, work with teachers. Dr. Reiner can certainly lead that. I would anticipate that she probably already has had some conversations, but
Okay.
I'm not aware of what they are at this point in time, but we will certainly do so and report that out at Academic Affairs.
Okay. The other thing, I picked a good night. I saw you talking about all the testing, and I know both my kids have benefited from some of this the MAPS testing, which I think is great. I do have a concern, though, that I feel like there's a lot of testing, because there's obviously CDTs, MAPS, DIBELS, obviously PSSA and PSSA prep. I guess my concern going forward is just to be cautious of the amount of days these kids are spent doing these tests and not allowing teachers to do what they're great at. And I don't know how many days are spent doing all this, but I do know that when I talk to my kids, it seems like quite a bit. So I guess just expressing a concern there that there is a lot of testing. I know some of it is extremely beneficial, and what what it allows the teachers to build on. But I do just have a concern that there does seem to be a lot of it.
We do put together an assessment calendar and are working on our calendar for next year, and we do align that with professional development days so that there's days to analyze that data, so we can bring that to Academic Affairs next month too, so that people can see that calendar. And I would agree that if we are testing and not doing something with the data, that is not the best use of our instructional time. But with our MTSS model, where we are trying to make extremely tight data-based decisions, I would name that if that data is used properly, that improves the instruction that students have.
I agree. So that's why it was
Sure.
just more of a comment than anything, because I've seen how it's helped both of my children.
Right.
And understand how important it is. Just wanted to look at the overall amount
Sure.
of it, that's all. But thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Okay. Motion to adjourn?
Motion. Second.
Second. Nope, so bad. Oh, we are adjourning to executive session.
Yes.
Discuss personnel and other appropriate issues.